Hello. Hi. Welcome, everyone. It is amazing to see you all, especially because I think tonight is game 5 for the Celtics. So let's go Celtics. But thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. And I see a lot of familiar faces, which is awesome. So I am excited to share with you all my journey and relationship with food and cuisine. Food for me is the greatest sign of friendship and love that I know. It's starting at a very young age. It was my beacon of hope. It was my measurement of love, my reminder that kindness exists and that humanity can shine just from a simple dish. For me, food symbolizes happiness, disparity, joy, and hardships. So I was found on a train in Seoul, Korea when I was 18 months old, just with the clothes that I was wearing. I had no birthday, no age, no name, and I was brought to an orphanage. And at about 3.5 years old, I was adopted by my parents, Edward Lev, who's Russian Jewish, and my mother, Marianne Glendon, who's Irish Catholic. And they brought me and welcomed me into their home in Newton, Massachusetts, with their 2 daughters, Liz and Katie, my sisters. But they were 5 years apart, and so my parents wanted a child in the middle, and just like that, I grew up a middle child. So when I was coming over from Korea, I took a plane by myself back then. I don't think that happens anymore. And my parents met me in New York City. And they were instructed not to feed me very much food because I had been malnourished in Korea. And those people who instructed my parents were correct. So apparently on the plane from Korea to New York, I gobbled up some Fritos and I promptly threw up over everyone that was around me. I've never touched a Frito ever since then. I do hear they're delicious, but I can't do it. So when I came, my mom made delicious chicken soup. And so I didn't speak English, but I was very, very hungry. And I just kept pushing the empty bowl of chicken soup to her. And she just kept remembering these people saying, don't feed her. And then my stomach literally distended out as if I was having a basketball in there. And they called the doctor. And luckily I was fine, but they found out early on that I love to eat food. And so for me, this was the first time in my life I believe I felt that I was fulfilled and nourished by love and this generosity of these people bringing me into their homes and feeding me. So when I came, I didn't speak any English, and it was really hard for my parents. In fact, I think I cried for the first 5 weeks because I didn't know who they were and I didn't know how to communicate with them. So they would bring me to Korean restaurants in the Boston area, the biggest one being Koreana. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but it's still there. And they would ask the owners and the wait staff to communicate with me and interpret what I was thinking and back and forth. And to me, this was just a gift that they thought of a way to be able to make me feel comfortable in a space, not only socially and to open those doors for communication, but also for food that I knew. And so those foods were bulgogi and kimchi. And my parents weren't even aware of that, but they sat there and watched me, my eyes light up, my parents say, when I saw kimchi. And so from there, my mother learned how to make bulgogi and kimchi. And it has been a staple in our house for our entire lives, which has its blessings. I don't know if people know kimchi. It can smell a little bit, but I love that smell. So my father, being Russian Jewish, made Russian peasant food. So growing up, we had foods that nobody that I've ever met in my life has actually ever heard of. So I'm gonna quiz you all. If anyone knows this, can we give them a prize? Does anyone know what gribbinus is? Gribbinus? I mean, this is stuff I love. Grimace is chicken skin fried in oil and butter. It is literally the best thing you will ever have. Think of fried chicken without the chicken. It's delicious. It is so good. We would have it all the time. And then the second thing we would have all the time is something called pacha. Pacha? No. Pacha is jellied cow hooves. Yes, you heard me correctly. And they would sit, my dad would make it, and it would sit in these clear jars in our refrigerators. They were not my mother's favorites, but they were, believe it or not, delicious. Luckily, my mom had learned to be a gourmet cook, and she cooked French foods. So we were able to have foods like bouillabaisse and salmon with beurre blanc sauce and poached pears. So I did have the two sides of that, which no matter what, both bring me incredible memories, even though they were drastically different. And my mom also really tried to keep a tradition with my father and would make noodle kugel for him. She literally killed herself to try to make it exactly how she thought it should be made, and she bought the most beautiful round kugel pan and spent hours, and his mother was like, no, we don't do that, we don't do round kugel, they make it like out of a cookie sheet. So but she knew, and I knew early on, how important tradition was to our family. Both my parents were lawyers, and they worked a great deal, but they really put emphasis on coming home at night and having dinner. My mom used to say, if your dad stayed as late as a partner in the firm as all the other partners, he probably would have done a lot better even, but he chose family and to be home every single night for dinner. And he would take that 6 o'clock train and be home. And it really was profound and impactful in the conversations that we were able to have as family, and deeply rooted us in that family tradition that he chose that. So even though I grew up and I was surrounded by amazing food, you know, in a very old-fashioned way, early on my dad said to me, babe, my dad always said babe before something like really serious. And I'm like, oh boy. And he's like, babe, no one is ever gonna marry you. You have no idea how to cook, so you're not gonna find a husband. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I didn't care, I was like in my 20s. So I was like, fine, whatever. But he actually was worried. He was like, you're gonna have to learn to cook. So in my 20s, I come back to BC, I go to a BC football game, I'm really excited. I'm actually shotgunning a beer, which I think I'm doing really well. And this very cute guy comes over to me and talks to me and talks me up, and I'm like, oh, this is going really well. And then like half an hour into it, he's like, I have a girlfriend. I'm like, what is happening here? But he's like, but the reason why I'm talking to you is I've got the greatest friend, Darren. I don't know where that name comes from, and I would love for you to have like a blind date with Darren. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I'd never been on a blind date. I don't know how to meet people at this age, I guess. So Darren and I talk on the phone. Seems like a nice enough guy. He comes to the door, and I'm like, oh boy. So he's like this very big Italian Irish fellow with his hair parted down the middle, feathered. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I don't mean that in a good way. So he takes me to this restaurant, I don't think it's around anymore, called the Spinnaker. And it's called the Spinnaker because it rotates while you're eating. And so I'm like trying to be focused on him, but meanwhile I'm seeing Boston swirl around. And it was way over the top. It was like too fancy for a blind date. So it didn't go well. The date did not go well at all. I was just like, okay, fine. But Darren wanted to see me again, and I was like, oh, what am I gonna do? I mean, I don't want to see this like feather-haired boy again. But I also thought it was rude to like, maybe on the phone, that, you know, there was no social media. I couldn't just like DM him and dump him. So I felt like I needed to see him and like maybe talk to him. So because I knew I was gonna tell him I didn't want to see him again, I went out and I got a really cheap bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken. I thought that was the best best way to go. So we sit down, we're eating the Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I'm like, you're a good guy, but I just don't want to see you again. And he's like, okay. And so that was it. But this great love story is always about timing. So a year later, we reconnect again, and it was the timing was right, and 25 years later and 3 kids, Darren and I are together, and we seek out buckets of Kentucky Fried Chicken and laugh about when I dumped him on that day. So never judge a book by its cover. He is literally the love of my life. He's the greatest human being. So remember at this point now, so we're getting married. I'm not a cook, no clue, don't even know what a measurement cup looks like. And Darren's Italian Sicilian mother literally says to me, like, I'm already not intimidated by coming into the family. She's like, you are never gonna learn to cook like me. Like, I am the greatest cook ever. And she said, and my son, Darren was very close to his mother, and my son loves my cooking. And you're never going to compare. And I'm like, wow, the stake is in the ground, Elaine. So I knew I had to learn to cook at that point. And Elaine graciously and lovingly took me under her wing. She taught me every single one of her secret recipes. She labored with me in times that I was like, I don't know, why can't we just microwave this to make it faster? I mean, I was always looking for a faster angle for the cooking, for things that took forever. But the kinds of dishes that we made together were gravy, which is not brown gravy, but a red gravy with meatballs and sausages and pork that takes hours to cook. Eggplant parmesan, which is still Darren's favorite, and he pretends to tell me I do it just as good as his mom, but I know I don't. Stuffed artichokes, pizzagana for Easter, where we put a cross on it at Easter time. So those hours and hours and years of cooking with Elaine brought us so close together that I really felt like she was also like my mother. And we had the most compassionate, loving relationship with one another, which of course just also brought me closer to her son because we had that relationship. So after learning all of Elaine's dishes, then I felt like I was passionate about cooking, sort of. I mean, I was mediocre at cooking, but I felt like I was getting the hang. So I then started to learn my mother's recipes, and that was it. I was off and running. I love cooking. Cooking is one of my most favorite things to do. I actually asked Eileen, I was like, could I cook for this whole group? Like, I could just bring food. She's like, that's a great idea, but no. So Elaine passed away 8 years ago, but with her passing, I have passed on her recipes to my children, and so every single holiday we have every single one of her dishes. And when the food is cooking and the aromas are going, we all remember Elaine and her huge, delicious hugs and kisses. And it's really, the kids, I mean, I don't know if I could never be sick or tired during a holiday, because the expectation is all of those foods are being made every single time, and I will never not do it because it's so integral to who they are. When my youngest daughter Caroline was 4 months old, I went back to work after maternity leave, and on the second day of being at work, I got a call from the emergency room of the hospital, and they said, your daughter has been severely hurt, you need to rush to the hospital. I was eating my lunch at work at my desk table, and got up and left the whole lunch there, and I never returned. So what had happened is that she was severely shaken by the nanny, and she had suffered 2 strokes in her brain, and they needed to do an emergency brain surgery. They told us that she had a 3% chance of survival because of how severely she was shaken. So we go to the hospital, and they put us in this tiny little private room, very dark, with a telephone on the wall, and there was another couple sitting across from us, and we could only imagine that their child was also in an operation. And for 8 hours, we sat there in dead silence. We never spoke to one another. And then, very far into that time, in between us, the largest rat you've ever seen with the longest tail comes walking out in between us, looks at both sets of parents, stops, and then keeps walking out. And we all just started laughing because it was so ridiculous that this rat was in children's hospital. But it also, for me, I felt like that rat was God, and it was a message to me that it's okay. It was this moment that I can't really explain, and that the rat was saying, it's okay, and have faith. And I'll never forget that rat. Don't get me wrong, I hate rats, but it was pretty amazing. So Caroline survived, and she came home, but they told us that there was a 3% chance that she would live a normal life because she had had such severe brain damage, and that it would take a very, very long time for us to know if she was going to be okay. Remember, she was 4.5 months old. So out of all of this, we had months and months of just worry and fear, and food poured in. The love poured in. It was, on a daily, weekly, monthly, people were bringing us food. Of course, people that we loved and knew and cherished, but also, amazingly, people that we didn't know. People that had heard our story from other people just dropping off food. One of the biggest impressions or impacts that I had was this individual, this woman who I used to supervise, came one night and brought me a dish. Now, this woman did not like me. I know that's hard to believe, but I supervised her, and I had given her a lot of kind of tough feedback about her overall presentation and how to just be more successful in the way she was presenting herself. So we didn't have like great banter during those meetings. But she came to my house one night and she said, I made you my favorite family dish growing up. And she said, and I am bringing you this dish with love and hope for your child. And it was the best food that I had ever had, but obviously not just because of the taste of it, but because of what she brought with it, which was that just unconditional love of someone wanting you and your family to be okay. So I am happy to let you know that Caroline is a senior in high school. She's healthy, she's fine, but that time brought so much grace in my husband's and my life to know that there were so many people out there that were so loving and kind to us. Female friendships are far one of the greatest gifts in my life, and for me, incredibly tied to celebration and breaking of bread and wine. So I have a few female groups, but one of the most impactful is my feral chicks. Now, feral chicks, I don't know if people know what feral chicks are. They are chicks gone wild. So we like to pretend like when we go out, we're wild. Yeah, so we self-named ourselves, but that's okay. So the feral chicks are my college friends, and every single month for 31 years, we go out to dinner on someone's birthday, and that person gets to pick the cuisine, gets to pick the place. I always want Olive Garden, and they've actually ixnayed that. We've never gone. I don't know why. I think Olive Garden has like endless pasta bowls. I'm like, that's a no-brainer. But and then once a year at Christmas, we have one of us cooks this spectacular meal because it's only one time. And my friend Patty, for 31 years, has made a homemade cake at Christmas. And we all just, it's that symbol and celebration of our lives together. The feral chicks, you can imagine, over 31 years, that was when we didn't have boyfriends, no husbands, no kids. We have been through every single thing together that you can imagine. But those dinners are so important to us because we know that it is a place that we always can come to and be so honest and real and raw with one another. And they are so integral to my health overall, to know that I'm going to see these amazing friends. And friends who can only support one another in a way that unconditional love can give back. So I love my ferals. Then I have another group of women, and it's called the Gourmet Book Club. And it's called the Gourmet Book Club because we read a book, and then we have to cook to the theme and cuisine of the book. So if there's a recipe, that makes it all the better, and challenging sometimes. I mean, we're making Croatian stew and Burmese meatballs and what have you. But because it's only every 18 months or so, because of the way the cycle goes for one of us to have to cook, when it is one of us, we put everything into it. We put our heart and soul into those meals, and it is just so magical to know that it is about gathering around the table and table fellowship and friendship. Last year, my friend Mary Beth unfortunately got cancer, and in the book group, and we were like, what do we do for her? And we said, of course, we bring her food from love in our dishes, in our family dishes. And so for a year, we would all bring her food, and her family gave a party at one point, Mary Beth, to survive, and they said, the Gourmet Book Club, those meals every single week is what brought my mother through all of this. To know, not again because of the food, but just to know that we were there for her, to support her and to lift her up. And even though at times we couldn't see her, that was okay. It was just leaving it there. So my own family, my husband and my 3 kids, Will, who's 22, Matt, who's 21, and Caroline, have now they've become integral into my love food journey, and they have learned to cook those meals that I've talked about. They each pick their favorite one. They've learned how to do it. They send pictures on our family group chat is called Bunch of Goons. And so they send it on that. And my son Matt started a blog called The Food Enthusiast and posts all the family dishes on there that he cooks. And then they come home for dinner. They're both here at BC. One's about to graduate. Seniors, woo! But they still do come home to have those family dinners with us because they talk about how important it is to them. So although I've talked a great deal about food, that isn't what gives me sustenance, right? It's the friendship, it's the love, it's the community, the special moments, the memories, the food passed at the door at a time of need. It is the symbol and sign of humanity, deep relationships, and the grace and kindness of others. It is a constant nourishment that is interwoven into my life, and it connects me to so many. Those connections or moments make the world beautiful to me and feed my soul. Thank you.